and we welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Schenectady. I am Stephanie Maslanka. My pronouns are she, her. Vicki Michela is our worship leader today. Pronouns she, her. Along with Mark Vermillier, pronouns are he, him. We welcome you to this morning's service, where we will focus on resilience through action. As we come into the circle and the new year together, we are grateful that you chose to be here. May we journey together and discover, as H.B. Stedham asked in describing today's Children's Chapel, what can we do to help us get through?
This is from the activist Howard Zinn. An optimist isn't necessarily a blithe, slightly sappy whistler in the dark of our time or any time. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we only see the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction.
So, before I reflect on my lived experience of resilience through action, I want to say that my convictions and the activism that flows from them come from a position of privilege. I have done what has been relatively easy and convenient for me, and I have never had to make any real sacrifices to do it. There are those who have risked so much in the struggle for peace and justice. Their activism has cost them their freedom, jobs, physical safety, and even their lives. That being said, I do think my story is worth sharing because just as I have felt validated and inspired to act or to do more or to do things in a different way by hearing other people's stories, I hope that maybe mine can do the same for some of you. So I grew up political blank slate in a working class family in Queens. My mother came of age in fascist Italy during World War II, where if you were found opposing the government, you could pay dearly. And maybe that's why there was practically no discussion of politics in our household. It was only much later in life that she expressed her inherently humanistic views. My father was from an Italian-American family of farmers and coal miners from Oklahoma who had immigrated to the U.S. chasing the promise of free land from the Homestead Act, something which I was to learn many years later, of course, displaced the indigenous population of the region. He had only a third grade education and was completely apolitical as far as I could tell. I had no idea if he even voted. But what my parents lacked in expressed political views was made up for by an atmosphere of love and open-mindedness. During college, like many of my peers, I began to identify as a liberal Democrat. Then, in 1986, I went to live in Italy, where I met and fell in love with my husband. He came of age during the turbulent, he's Italian, and highly political 1970s. And I remember him being shocked that I had never heard of his hero, Che Guevara. One time, he showed me his high school class photo, and he pointed to each classmate, telling me where they stood on the political spectrum. He himself fell into the moderate so-called moderate camp. But everything being relative, that meant he was a socialist. And so we shared a common worldview, but while I was an armchair liberal, he was a bona fide radical, having spent years going to left-wing student protests. Eventually, we ended up living in New York City in the early 1990s, when the first Gulf War broke out. And it was there that I actually went to my very first anti-war protest. It was a revelation to march alongside hundreds of other people chanting "No blood for oil." And we went to some pro-Palestinian rallies too. I still have a photo that I snapped of a little girl with big brown eyes holding up a sign that read, "Stop killing Palestinian children like me." And we're still not listening to that little girl. Back then, we used to listen to a lefty radio station, WBAI. I don't know if any of you know WBAI. And it carried shows like Democracy Now! And Alternative Radio with talks by people like Noam Chomsky and Vandana Shiva. And my politics moved more to the left. So much so that it was hard for me to get excited about US elections because I felt that both parties were beholden to the military industrial complex and to corporate interests. After we moved to the Capital District, we continued to go to different kinds of protests, mostly local, and this time bringing our daughters with us. And because we wanted to set an example for them and for activism to be a part of their lives too. But it was pure indoctrination. I was admittedly a little dogmatic then. I generally voted Green Party because while I had no illusions about their ability to win elections, their policy platform of protecting the environment, peace, social justice aligned with my values, and I felt that they contributed to the policy debate. But I eventually became a little disillusioned with a party that really wasn't able to build support from the bottom up. Maybe I thought it would be better to move the Democratic Party to the left from within during the primary process. I began to understand that in order to get things done, compromise is necessary, and that it's self-defeating to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And though I firmly believed then and continue to believe that dissent is patriotic, I found myself wanting to not just protest against something, but fight for something. So we decided to dip our toe into electoral politics. And in 2004, we hosted our first letter writing party to voters in swing states. I kept copies of the sweet and funny letters that the kids so earnestly wrote, my own daughters, also Dane and Kelly Jennings, among others. And I have photos of Nancy Peterson, Ed Kautz, Donald and Mindy Wisenhunt, dutifully writing their letters at my dining room table. Looking back, I realize that a couple of evenings of letter writing was almost insignificant. But coming together to take action was meaningful. And even though our candidate lost, at least we could say we did something. A few years later, I was talking politics after the service with Mark Hyland. He told me that he was using his 2-week vacation to travel to the then swing state of Ohio to canvass for Obama. Mark became a good friend, and if you were fortunate enough to have met him, you know what a funny, kind, thoughtful man he was. His commitment inspired me. And that year, I traveled to Scranton, Pennsylvania with 2 friends to knock on doors. It was so much more interesting and easier than I thought it would be. And a month later, at an election watch party, surrounded mostly by UUs, we celebrated the victory of our awesome first Black president. My activism continued to evolve. It can be overwhelming to think about and try to fight all the injustice in the world and in the country. So, about a dozen years ago, I decided to choose one or two issues and, for the most part, focus my energies there. I chose climate because I don't think it gets enough attention. And I do believe that it's the greatest threat to life on Earth and the thing that will cause the most suffering if not addressed. And it also relates to my other passion, which is ending factory farming. I also chose to help try to elect candidates who will fight for the things that I care about. So while I'm working on fewer issues, my commitment has actually increased. Although at first I dreaded phone banking, I developed a bit of a thicker skin, and now I actually enjoy it. I made more canvassing trips to Pennsylvania, once with Tom Comperin. Where are you? There he is. And Carol Conyers. Another with Bridget Almas, and several with John and Rachel Marr, and my friends at Progressive Schenectady, of course, who are here today. I've also worked to help elect congressional and local candidates. I started joining lobby groups that meet at our with our New York State representatives in Albany on environmental legislation, often riding the local bus to the Capitol with Paula Shaw and Nancy Peterson, John Rashofsky, and then getting there to find other UUs like Peter Looker, Gary Lassard, and other people, other UUs from here and from FUSA. And I'm sorry if I'm leaving anybody out if you were on this. I also joined a couple of committees in my town where I feel like I've been able to have some local impact. By the way, have I mentioned that I retired a couple of years ago? And that does explain a lot. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Every day, do something that scares you." And social activist Maggie Kuhn, who at age 65 founded the Gray Panthers, said, "Stand before the people you fear and speak your mind, even if your voice shakes." When my kids were growing up, I used to tell them that they should go outside their comfort levels because that's how you grow and gain confidence. But to be honest, I didn't always practice what I preached. When I was asked to take on a leadership role in the climate group Third Act or to lead a lobby visit, I hesitated because I get kind of impatient with the wonky details of legislation. But I decided to say yes to both because I trusted that I would get the guidance I needed. And through these experiences, I have increased my knowledge greatly, and I've developed a couple of skills that I didn't have. I also joined the steering committee of Progressive Schenectady, a local chapter of Indivisible, and the camaraderie and the friendships that I have found there have become priceless to me. I like to call them my sisterhood of badass women. Together, we have celebrated victories and gotten each other through some crushing defeats. And it's been much healthier than eating a family-sized bag of potato chips. Organizing is so much better to do with friends because, first of all, you get to hang out with your friends, often over dinner, which you would want to do anyway, right? We collaborate on which events to promote and participate in and hold each other accountable to actually show up when we say we will. And with so much performative virtue signaling on social media, it's great to know that there are people who just want to get down to work. And here at US, it's been great to make good trouble with the amazing Kat Wolfram, Lars Dahl, and the rest of the UU The Vote team. And we are really, really lucky to have ministers who value, support, and participate in UU The Vote and other kinds of activism. I think we all can agree with the adage that democracy is not a spectator sport. As the 2024 election approached, it was difficult to not obsessively look at the neck and neck polls. And one of the things that actually relieved my anxiety was increasing my voter outreach. So I started phone banking many days, most days actually, and trying to get other people to join me. Some, like Roz Dow, where is she? Mary O'Keefe, Catherine Miller, did just that. Other people crossed the street and tried not to make eye contact with me when they saw me coming. Many, many people like Donna Lassard came to the postcard writing parties that I hosted. About a week before the election, I participated in a national indivisible online forum called Freedom Over Fascism to discuss the various potential election outcomes. And we were told to write down 3 sentences and keep them in an easily accessible place. Number 1, this fight is not over if we win, and this fight is not over if we lose. Number 2, in crisis, lean into community. Number 3, there is a plan and you will have support. I did find the meeting reassuring, and it helped to know there was a post-election plan no matter the outcome. But to be honest, the only plan I was interested in making was which venue we would choose for our dance party to celebrate electing our first female Black South Asian president. And while there were some victories like passing the ERA in New York, many of our worst fears came to pass. I had been in some denial, almost irrationally optimistic, and therefore not prepared for the defeat that we suffered. But if there is one thing I have learned about myself, it's that I am a hopeful person, but I'm also pretty resilient. And that makes sense. It's hard to be resilient if you don't have hope. In preparation for this service, of course, I had to look up the definition of resilience. Actually found out there are 3. One is to resist the negative effects of stressors. 2 is to bounce back from stressors. But 3 is to grow from stressors. That's my favorite. On Wednesday, November 6th, I, along with some of you here, attended a post-election vigil here. And our group formed a circle. And we wrote down and shared what we fear most in the coming administration. I wrote that I'm afraid that I won't have the courage to make the kinds of personal sacrifices that may be needed to preserve our democracy and protect the people that this administration may target. We hugged and cried, and together began to travel the path of coming to terms with a new reality. Such defeats can feel like a physical trauma, and just like any injury, we usually require a period of rest and quiet in order to begin to heal. For me, that meant taking a little break from the news. But for anyone who has had a knee or a hip replaced, not long after surgery, you have to get up and you have to start moving again. You have to work through the pain in order to come out on the other side. But you can't do it alone. You need a physical therapist. You need friends who will check in on you, drive you places, pick up your pain medication at CVS. You need your spouse or your child to bring you a bowl of soup while you sit on your recliner. If you're lucky, someone from the caring team will bring you a poinsettia. I have come out of this election wanting to understand the people who voted differently than I did. Maybe it's because I talked to so many strangers on the phone who were perfectly polite and yet disagreed so fundamentally with me on this issue? What brought them to their decision? And could there be any merit to any of their views? Did they vote in spite of rather than because of the hateful rhetoric? I am open to having that conversation. Not only am I open to it, I believe it's essential that we have that conversation. Howard Zinn wrote, "As dogma disintegrates, hope appears," because it seems that human beings, whatever their backgrounds, are more open than we think, that their behavior cannot be predicted from their past, that we are creatures vulnerable to new thoughts and new attitudes. And while such vulnerability creates all sorts of possibilities, both good and bad, its very existence is exciting. It means that no human being should be written off, no change in thinking deemed impossible. So while I have my convictions, I don't have all the answers, and nor am I certain about the best way forward. I am trying to be humble. I'm trying to find common ground and not judge everyone that I disagreed with, because we are all the product of our environment. Who knows? Under different circumstances, I might hold very, very different opinions. I can definitely see my gentle yet uneducated father from deep red Oklahoma being like one of those polite strangers on the phone. Activism has enriched my life. I think it has made me a better person. It has certainly become a big part of my identity. And I have done some thinking about why. Like so many people, I want my life to have meaning and find a way to have a positive impact in this brief time that I'm alive on Earth. But there are many paths one can take to find that. I have nothing but respect for people who choose ways that are a little different from mine, volunteering in their community or abroad, being a foster parent, a social worker, healer, or teacher in a low-income community, or a leader in their church. We all have to be our authentic selves, and we can do more than one thing. My chosen path is no doubt the result of the people I have met and have influenced me, especially my husband, but that's not the whole story. Setting aside for now the important question of whether activism is the best way to affect change, I think the reason why I do what I do is because I want to play a part, however small, in the historical time and place in which I lived. I think about all the decent people who went through life watching as history unfolded all around them, but not participating in it. And I don't want that to be me. I hope if I had been alive in an earlier time or place, I would have been an abolitionist or a suffragist or a peace activist. I like to think that even if my voice was shaky, I would have spoken out.